Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Minhaj and I'm the CEO of Psyda, which is an AI-enabled academic and industrial research agency. I think today is a very special day for me because I get to interview someone that I hold in very high esteem, and I've learned very much from his videos, and not only his videos, but the psychology that he puts behind teaching with passion and interest and love. And you can feel that when you watch his videos. My guest, Dr. Luis Serrano, is an accomplished educationist, a quantum scientist, a wonderful human being, and a kind soul. So without any ado, let me add our favorite Dr. Luis Serrano. Welcome, Dr. Luis.
Thank you very much, Minhaj. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm a big fan of your podcast, so it's great to talk to you.
You know, it's a very special day for me also because I can tell you, when I got into machine learning and data science, I wanted to find some videos or a teacher who does not actually tell me about the equations, differential equations, and algebra and geometry and everything that you would need for data science, but also tell us the bigger picture of how things work. And your channel was something that I found extreme solace in out of the crowd of complicated numbers. And one of the things that you actually have written on your profile is that learning mathematics and physics and science should not be complicated. And we're going to be talking a lot about this today. But let's talk about how did the journey start? Introduce Colombia to me.
Oh, Colombia is a wonderful place. I'm actually there right now. I live in Canada full time, but I'm spending a period of time here in Colombia. And growing up here was wonderful. It's a very, people are close to each other, so I learned to sort of I really close to family, close to friends, and sort of you keep that with yourself. And I had my upbringing here until I finished high school, so I'm very very close to this culture.
I only found out today that there was a time when Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela was one country. Do you read that anything about that in school?
The Gran Colombia, yes, and Panama was there too. We study a lot of that in school and how things got divided after independence, etc. It's interesting.
Tell me about your upbringing in Colombia, because from what I hear, it has seen a lot of unrest during the years in terms of drug trafficking, illegal immigration with rebels, FARC army, a lot of going back and forth between government and the revolutionary forces. I assume that it was a very unstable situation to grow up in. What are your memories when growing up in Colombia in your time?
Yes, the 90s were quite rough, 80s and 90s. Of course, the root of everything is oppression and oligarchy, right? If you keep all the power and the money, the power in the hands of very few, and leave very little for the rest, then there is gonna be a lot of unrest in the population, and symptoms will occur from that. And so after many years of that oppression, just things got created. The armed revolutionary forces were a very bad sort of reaction to this that got out of hand. Drug trafficking in the 90s was also very very rough, and the policies of fighting against the drugs and the wars just created a horrible scenario, and people in Colombia were the victims of that. I was in a special place in Bogota where the conflict was not right in front of me, but it was there. I mean, you would hear bombs, and you were hear of people getting kidnapped or killed. It was a rough time. So I think now it's much better, but there's still problems. And what I admire from people here is the resilience, right? How people just say, we've gone through a hard time, but we're gonna keep fighting and keep smiling, and that's quite amazing. But yeah, I mean, it was it was a tough time, and since you hadn't seen anything different, that's kind of how I felt it all the time. And when I lived in different places, I got to contrast it, and it was it's quite interesting.
Luis, what do you think people learn from adversity and poverty and unstable situations in life?
I think you learn to appreciate things a lot more when you have them. I think some adversity is needed, because if you never have it, you never really know what you have. You never really appreciate it. When you have privilege, you're the last person to notice it. Everybody else notices it except for you. And for you, it's just normal, right? That's life. But when you suffer through adversity, then you understand what's important, right? And the people around you, and the things that you have, you appreciate them much more. So I think, to me, it's been helpful all my life to have lived that a little bit, and be able to appreciate things better.
Did you have other siblings growing up at the same time?
Only child.
Only child.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Spoil.
Spoil. Well, that kind of explains the fact that you went to Colegio San Carlos,
Yeah.
which is one of the best schools to go if you live in Bogota. How did you actually manage to afford that? I mean, were you in middle class, or do you have a privileged,
Yeah.
spoiled upbringing?
I wasn't rich, spoiled, but I was middle class, and this was a private school that was particularly cheaper than all the other private schools. So my mom was crossing fingers that I get into that one, because otherwise it'd be hard to to go to another private school. I mean, yeah, it was. It is. It was a good school that puts emphasis in mathematics, which I found that it was useful for me.
What did your parents do?
I work at a bank. Yeah, so I grew
Okay.
up with my mom. They were divorced, and my mom worked at a bank, and so sometimes she'd take me to the bank with her. So I was since I was little.
I mean, is that partly the reason why you are so good at mathematics?
I wonder. I don't know. I did see a lot of sheets with numbers growing up.
So what did she do? She was accountant there, or
She was a branch. She got the branch manager. At the end, she was just an employee in the office.
okay.
Yeah.
And how was your childhood like, being a single child studying in Colegio San Carlos? And then, did you have friends, or you were always an introvert?
I was always very introverted. I had my friends, and my very special friends, which are still my good friends. But yeah, I was always the sort of nerdy kid, very introverted, and it's a school of boys, sort of uh, very macho boys. So it was a lot of bullying. I was bullied growing up, and in school. But other than that, is, I guess, pretty normal. I had up and down periods of doing well and not well in school, but in general, I was always sort of the quiet kid with glasses that you see on that sort of the nerdy TV kid.
It's very interesting. Bullying kind of, especially associated with people who are introvert. Maybe, they put up a lot with other people's transgressions in some way.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, were you able to cope with that? Because one of the lessons that I learned from a very wise old man is that, if someone bullies you, what you do is you take a hammer, you hit them, and you run. So what was the
That would have
best
been a good
advice you
idea.
got?
Yeah, where were you when I needed advice?
No, I mean,
Uh,
maybe not in Colombia, because
no, I find that I was very hard at the time, because that's your entire universe, right? That's your entire world is that. So and you need the social aspect a lot, especially growing up. So it's your everything, and so it's kind of rough, and so it I think it made me a tougher person later. I think I kind of went from one to the other one, where I just wouldn't put up with anything in adulthood for a while, and then I kind of mellowed down. But I find it no, I look back, and I think it's in some way there's a silver lining in everything, and I noticed that it makes it's kind of a controlled situation of abuse. You're not gonna be killed or anything. You're not, it's just gonna be like you suffer the emotional abuse and the physical abuse, but it's controlled. It's still not gonna get out of hand. And so in some way you're put into a situation that I think makes you more empathic in the future. I feel like I that helps me a lot to have empathy with others. And when I see the world situation, and I see people that are struggling much harder than being bullied, right? But when I see those situations, I can sort of relate the stress they feel a little bit, right? I can imagine it, and so it makes you more empathic, and it makes you not want to make anyone feel like that. So in some way, I'm thankful that it was sort of a controlled stress situation.
Would you agree with the statement that every person has a monster inside, and there's a capability of nurturing your animal side and your human kinder and spiritual side, and the challenge in life is to actually feed the angel and not the monster? Do you think that is in some way correct?
Yeah, I think we are a product of who we are inside and the situation that we grow up in, right? And who we are is definitely those two aspects, and the situation that we grow up in can turn us into one or the other one. So I think that's why it's important that, you know, society does is kind to everyone, and that we are able to get the best out of every person.
How did you and when did you decide to go to Canada for studies? I believe it must have been a very important decision, both in terms of finances and economics. And you are also son of a single mother, and
Yeah.
she must have been dependent on you. So it must have been a big call. How did that happen?
Yeah, it was a long process. When I was in Colombia, I was doing the math Olympiads, and so that was a very good opportunity when you were doing well in those, that they you would sort of be open to scholarships and things like that. So many of my fellow friends from the Olympics would get the scholarship, would go to the US or something. So I always had that in my mind, and I thought it's an opportunity that I want to take if there is there, because I may not have it in the future. It's sort of an open door that I want to take. So I consider the US. The US was expensive, more expensive. So I looked at Canada as well, and it was a family decision as well. At the same time, my mom was thinking about moving. The 90s in Colombia, as I said, they were rough, and if you sort of saw an open opportunity, you would take it. And so I started applying to places in Canada, and got some scholarships, and we decided that it was doable. And so I embarked, and my family embarked a little later. And yeah, there I was. It was a great decision. It was a hard transition of cultures and everything, but it's one of the best decisions I've taken. It was really fun. Also, I think in the culture in the late 90s, if you say you're going to study mathematics, it was seen strange, right? It was like you're going to starve to death. And so I got a lot of that. Colombia, there was a lot of, like, study something that gives you money. And I was like, I think I'm not going to make money with something I'm terrible at. And so that sort of ignited the idea of leaving to places that maybe were more, I'd have more of a chance as a pure mathematician, whatever it is that I end up doing as a pure mathematician, right? I didn't know at the time what you could do.
Um, I don't know. Every time I talk to someone who is from an immigrant background, hard work, blood, sweat, and tears story, it sends me back to my own story. And I know that the first flight, when you take it out of your comfort zone, it's almost a crowdfunding project. So how did you actually get the money? In my case, I had money from flight from my dad, and I had the expenditure from someone else, and then my brother and everyone else. So it's kind of a family project. How's that in
Yeah,
Colombia?
my mom made a huge effort. I think she made a big bet, and so she put most of what we had for the beginning, and then Once I was in Canada, then I would work on the summers. So I would work on research. And Canada's much cheaper tuition than the US. Thinking the US would have been difficult. But the time it sort of worked out that with that investment from my mom and the work I was doing in the summers, things work out, sort of added up. But yeah, it was not easy, especially for her. So I'm always very very thankful to the effort she made.
How was culture different once you got to Canada?
Yeah, it was very different. I mean, I think I try to get the best of both worlds, right? And so in Colombia, there's one thing is that mentality tends to be only one mentality. I think if you think a certain way, then you're fine. But if you deviate from that, it's very strange. And so you just don't deviate for that. So my mentality was unique. Well, I mean, not unique. The opposite of unique. It was only one, from the same from everybody. Whereas I noticed that in Canada, you could have many different points of view. And so I started just meeting people who thought very different than me in many ways. And I was like, oh, that's strange. And I started getting challenged, and challenging my own views, uh, in anything, social, political, anything. So it was a very eye-opening experience for me to meet people who thought so different from me. So yeah, and as I said, I try to get the best of both worlds, right? So I took the things of the Colombian culture that I like the most, the unity, the everything, and then I took the things of Canadian culture that I like the most, which is the open-mindedness, that there is there, right?
Okay. So if I were to ask you to choose one good and one bad thing about both Colombia and Canada, would that be?
One good and one bad thing.
Hmm.
Uh, I think uh, in in Colombia, one good thing is you're just very close to people. I mean, everybody, your neighbor, your entire family. You're always there. There's always a crowd, and you need that. I mean, I think a lot of rates of depression may occur because of loneliness, and so that you don't get in Colombia. When I'm here, I'm just surrounded. You always sort of socialize. You go to the bank and socialize with the person there. You're just everywhere. So you need that. That's one good thing. One not so good thing of is yeah, the mentality is sort of uh, very traditional. It's conservative, and it's not so open to new things. And so there's things that I'm not a big fan of, right? I mean, I like to, yeah, I like to think differently. I like to, like, Colombia is very stratified, and so you hang out with people in your stratus, not higher, not lower, and it's very hard to move within them. And so it's a social structure and an economic structure that is settled for hundreds of years. I don't like that because there's so many people that could, deserve many opportunities, and it's hard for them to get it, right? So I like a society that's just more equal, and where everybody gets the same opportunities, right? And that's one thing I like about Canada. In Canada, there's a lot more. Obviously there's social differences and there's financial differences between people, humongous, but there tends to be less. There tends to be more of a level playing ground, uh, and you can, I guess it's a little more based on you if you succeed or not, right? And there's sort of opportunities for everybody. There's healthcare, education is more affordable. I really like those things, and I enjoyed them when I was there. So I'm very thankful, but I enjoy the fact that everybody gets them, right? Um, so so that's something I loved about Canada. And what I think it could be better in Canada, it's uh what I had in Colombia, which is the unity, right? Like, people tend to be more distant. This happens in Canada, the US. Kids leave the house. They don't talk to parents that much. It's you don't know your neighbor. It's a little bit of that distance, and I was lucky to find that with, I had friends from everywhere here, which is one thing I liked about Canada is that there's people from everywhere. There's people from so many nationalities, and you get to meet them, and it's sort of you get to have a world view. So I had some of that, but yeah, I did lack some human interaction when I moved here because yes, there was just more distance, right?
I guess I totally get you. People like us who share a culture which is very vibrant and talkative, and sharing, and put a lot of emphasis on emotional well-being and collectiveness. They find it themselves in a very odd position, even though the playing field is very level. So I studied in Sweden, and
Yes,
it's as cold as Canada, I guess. So this possibility of genuine human interaction, well, on the level where it's more collective, is probably something that's missing. And I was just wondering, did you stumble upon a situation, or you got yourself to the point where loneliness has become a huge problem that's coming in between your productivity and your life trajectory? Because I know from the fact that if you look at the mental disorders or depression or borderline statistics, Western world is way higher. Let's say the Western educated, industrialized, rich countries, they tend to score a lot higher when it comes to reported depression cases. And from our experience, I guess that's very obvious. But do you think that this relative felicity and opulence can become a curse itself?
absolutely, absolutely. I think the Western society has a very sort of worked centric approach, and your identity gets defined by what you do a lot, and less by who you are. And we tend to get so much into it that we tend to just start working really hard and just don't interact with others. So that definitely creates a lot of depression. I myself have suffered depression in long periods of my life because of that. I mean, when I move to a new place, and I do move a lot to a new place, and you have nobody for a while, and it was like super cold and no sun, and you're working hard. Like it's very easy to get depressed, and it's hard to, in order to pull out of it, you have to challenge the surroundings because everybody's in the same place, right? And you were in academia as well, and there's also a place for that is easy to get very isolated if you're doing your own research or your own work. It's easy to get in your own bubble, and then depression, just it's an effect of that, right?
Yeah, I totally get it. And I was just wondering, you followed the traditional hardworking, brilliant immigrant who comes to university, does fantastic work, but there's no gap in between your studies. So it's just bachelor's and a master's, and there's a PhD, and there's a postdoc, and then there you go to Google. I was just wondering, did you ever get to a point where and we're going to be talking about. I mean, you've talked about it in your previous podcast that at some point you got disillusioned with the fact that you had to be a professor. I mean, your love was for teaching was there, but then of course it's a long and fruitless journey at some point, and you think you start having the urge to live a better life. So put
Yeah.
it that way. So I was just wondering, did you actually have time in between to travel, to think about your own self and, do the journey inside instead of, the journey to social prosperity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've given myself time, but I never had the chance of taking a long break, right? Like a year of going somewhere and traveling. I did switch a few times on direction because I was just made an introspection, and realized that some things weren't my thing, right? When I was in academia, which was sort of my dream for the entire time to be a professor. And I started finding out that the research in pure mathematics was wonderful, but was not what was filling my cup, right? It was difficult. It was sort of doing. I was doing the same thing. Uh, it was just not. Yeah, I wasn't doing it for me, and I didn't think I was, producing the most amazing research, just putting okay research, but certainly it wasn't worth the sacrifices that you have to make. At least for me, for others it is, and that's great. But the sacrifices of moving to different places, living in places you don't want to live for a year, putting your life on hold until you get that sort of prized professor position, just weren't outweighing they weren't outweighed by how much I enjoyed it, because I was just enjoying it. Okay, I enjoyed the teaching a lot more than I enjoyed the research, and that's when that a combination of that and the scarcity of professor jobs that I was finding on my search, and is that I wasn't getting many the calls or anything, just made me look inside and say, okay, do I maybe I should do something else. That's when I decided to work in tech, and then even after tech, I had another transition, because as a programmer, I was not very happy and not producing as fast as I could have, or as I should have. I was learning a lot, but certainly not like writing production code wasn't uh, the thing for me. And so I also had another introspection of searching what is it that I really want. And that's when I stumbled into teaching. That's when I looked back and I thought teaching really is my thing, because in all the periods of my life that I've done so I've always done well teaching. So I that's when I decided to go for that. And so far, I think that's when my life started, really, like when I started realizing that I was doing good things.
No, literally everyone, every professor that I've interviewed on my podcast, and they're very accomplished both in terms of their publications and their work and its impact. All of them seem very disillusioned with the system of education, and I was never a fan of education system. When I was studying in school, school simply makes you cram books, or maybe it was just my schooling, even though by standards, it was a very good schooling, and I remember fondly some of my teachers. But the general concept of education, it doesn't give you joy, it doesn't give you pleasure, and it doesn't teach you to enjoy the learning itself instead of the grades and the career prospects. If you were a little bit smarter, your family, your friends, your colleagues start looking towards you as you were a blank check at some point. You're going to get cashed out of that, and that doesn't give you an intrinsic sense of pleasure and happiness. And on higher education levels, where you get to postdoc and doc, and I teach a lot of students these days who are enrolled either in PhD or in their postdocs and working workshops, and I can tell they're not doing it for themselves. It's for some kind of arbitrary prestige or hope to get to a professorship tenured position at some point, but that's not making them happy. Do you have similar experience?
Oh, 100%. I found that the way I thought as a kid, I thought I was stupid. I didn't think education is bad. I just thought I must be stupid because I'm not getting anything. I'm always sort of a distracted kid, that a little bit, head all over the place. And so I did poorly in school, always. And when I look back, I realized that, the education system the traditional education system is terrible in so many ways. First of all, is the one thing that never changes. Look at any industry. Any industry evolves, right? You go to a hospital, it's not going to look like a hospital 100 years ago. It's going to look, and if it did, we'd be scared. Whereas educational institutions, universities, they try hard to look like 100 years ago and 1,000 years ago, right? The methods are the same as all of modern history, right? Like there's a person standing up, talking to others, and the others are there passively receiving and learning. And I don't know you, but I'm at my stupidest when I'm sitting down looking at the front. I'm not doing anything. I'm not interacting. I'm not reasoning. I'm just looking and absorbing. And that may work for some people. I think there's type of student that that can do that, the one that can concentrate, but it's a very small sector of the population. And for many others, that doesn't do it. And so we have a system of education that doesn't do it for most people. And most people just think they're stupid. How many people have you heard the sentence, "Oh, I'm just really bad at math"? Most people say that, and I used to say it, right? But that's not true, right? We're bad at the language that we're being taught. And the language, I'll say the example of mathematics, but that works in with anything, right? We are given mathematics in one particular language, which is formulas. And we are expressing beautiful and simple concepts in a way that is illegible for most people, right? Which is the same as if I take a song and instead of singing it to you, I just show you the sheet music and I go, look at this beautiful song. And if you've never seen sheet music, you just think it's terrible, or you just think there's nothing to it. But if I sing it or if I play an instrument, you'll appreciate it. And that's what we do with mathematics and with everything in science or anything. We just code it in a language that only few people feel comfortable, and we call those people smarter, and we say those are the people that can do math. But no, everybody can do the concepts. It's just not everybody can understand the language. And I was terrible for that language, and that's why I thought I was bad at math. It was it first in the math Olympiads and with some good mentors, with good teachers that actually made me think a little more, that I started realizing that I was indeed good at math. I was just bad at abstraction, right? So that's one problem. That's, I think, two problems there with education. And also in academia, there's a level of sort of prestige in not explaining well. Like if you think of a cartoon of a professor, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Some person explaining in a board super complicated stuff, and then it just sounds like a genius because it's so genius that nobody can understand what they say. But it should be the opposite. The genius should be if everybody can understand you, right? If you can put things in a way that everybody understands. And but in that's not something that is so valued in academia. It's more the opposite. People try to sound, whether consciously or unconsciously, they try to sound illegible, right? So that's another problem with education. And other problems with education that I can mention are, well, it doesn't reach everybody, right? We have technology to bring education to most humans in the world, to many humans, and we still have a method that teaches it to very few. You have to be in the right location, you have to have money to pay for it, you have to be in a right age, because you can't, what if you're 60 and you decide to learn something new, but it's hard to go to school, or if you're 5, like it's very, it puts a lot of restrictions on people. And that's why I think education needs to evolve. And this last year, though terrible, it has forced us to really improve education, right? To really use technology for our good. And technology, there's all opinions that it's good or bad. There's pros and cons for education, but one thing is that it helps us reach a lot more people, and if we do it properly, it may help us use the right amount of interactivity and personalization so that everybody gets their best way of learning.
I think one of the reasons that whatever you say goes straight to my heart is you realize the missing thing when you see it, because you were the one who were at the loss. So I had this failed attempt of studying physics for 1 year back in university. I was studying computational physics, and I was reasonably good at mathematics. I totally aced it in high school, but then I dropped out because, and I realized that when I've learned a little bit about cognitive psychology and developmental psychology, how do actually people learn? They use scaffolding and the knowledgeable other and visualization of the information. So one of the things that on your channel you do is that you follow a psychological principle, which I wish my teachers had done that back then, and I would have made a reasonably good physicist, which is that I learned from top to down learning approach, which means that if you're teaching me differential equation, why don't you just first tell me what is the bigger picture of that? I mean, how
Absolutely.
is that applied in the world? What is the importance for that? Because it's very impersonal. I look at this equation and it starts giving me headaches. But if someone can convince me that this is something that you would need in order to fix a larger human problem and you would make a contribution, and then visualize that. One of the biggest the positives of your video is that you visualize the information in such a fun and immersive, engaging way that people who generally find physics very repulsive, they would be very attracted to that. And it's not only the numbers that you would see on the first slide. So it's the bigger picture. So I
Yeah.
remember one of your videos. Let's talk about your YouTube channel.
Hmm.
So I was just recently looking at one of your oldest videos, probably the first one, or maybe the second one, the Bayes theorem, in which you gave an example of,
Oh, yeah.
if I was sick, I would just go to the hospital, and then the doctor would take my test and would tell me, well, you have this disease, and then you would explain the probability of what is the probability that that test really is saying what it's saying. How did you actually got to that approach? Was it from your and I think I was 2016. Was it from your disillusionment from academia finally, or did you just think that now I am in a position to actually think of a bigger picture and explain it to everyone else?
I feel like it was due to my difficulty understanding throughout my whole life. I always noticed that I was slower than my peers, especially when I was studying mathematics. Like I would do okay, but my peers would get it quickly. Like we'd go to class and they'd be like taking notes, and I'd be like, what was that? And they would be like, come on, it's easy, it's just this. And then, so I thought I was dumber. But then I would spend a lot of time trying to understand things in a simple way, right? And so I would try to explain the thing to myself in a really small example, and then I'd be super proud, and I'd be telling people, "Hey, look, this big theorem, I finally understood it in this little scenario where a person is walking and this happens," and they'd be like, "Okay, sure," but uh, because they were much more abstract, right? They could always get things. This is level of abstraction. I'm here, and they were here, and so the things were taught here, and so they would catch them, work with them, do the homework, and then send it back, and always here. And I was here, so I had to bring things down, download them from up there, explain them to myself, and then I could do the homework, and then bring them back up. So it would take me a lot longer. Um, but I had to explain things to myself in a simple way. Otherwise, I would not be able to do the problems, the homework. I would just not be able to get it. And so it was frustrating, and it was a lot slower. And the same thing happened with research, with my peers who were doing research. They were always at this level, so they would learn a new thing, and immediately they'd be able to get results from that, just from that definition. Whereas I had to bring it down, understand it in an example, then I would be able to get results, and then go write it back again in the top level, which is very, very hard.
I guess one of the question at this point is that since you think your peers were at the higher level of abstraction, but do you think they could also explain that in a way that you do? Because I
Very
have just
hard.
find exactly this is what I
Yes.
found out. Just because you understand something, you
Yes.
cannot you cannot automatically teach it to other people, and that's the story of university. I mean, you have
Yes.
brilliant professors with publications and everything, and
Absolutely.
they just simply stand and stutter or insult people because they don't understand that, and this is not
Yeah.
how it works.
Absolutely. And I never connected those two. So my friends who were so much faster than me, and had better grades, whenever it was time to give a talk, some classes required giving a talk, or sometimes you had to do TA work or teach a class, and it was very hard for them. The majority, some were good, and for me that was easy. Like that was the easy part. I would just go explain it in the way that I understand it, and then everybody would understand. And so I always thought it was a trade-off, right? Like the gods made me stupid in math, but they made me awesome at explaining, and they did the opposite to all my friends. And I never connected that it was the exact same thing happening to both of us, right? And so when I was teaching, when I was in academia, and I was teaching live classes, and I really enjoyed that part, or when I was making the YouTube videos or something, I just explaining the way I understand it. And I know that if I put a formula, that if there's a person who's like me, that person will not understand it. So I explain it to myself. That stuff that you see on YouTube, that's a picture of how I understand the stuff in my brain. So I don't have to work for that because the work was done when I was trying to understand it in the first place.
It
Right?
turned out there were 76,000 other people on your YouTube who didn't understand that.
I'm so glad for them, and I empathize.
Right out of your education, you went to Google as a machine learning engineer, where you've been working on recommendation systems and other things. And I was just wondering, how did actually working at Google, understanding the bigger picture in industry in Silicon Valley, and both of us actually come from academics into the industry. And I was just wondering, were you able to translate some of your ideas from academia into industry, and then from industry to your YouTube channel? Were there any, to use the
Yes.
neural network term, transfer learning?
Transfer. Oh my God, that's a great analogy. Yeah, that's total transfer learning. Yeah, in the same way that we talked at the beginning today, and I told you that I had tried to get the best of the Colombian culture and the Canadian culture and try to join it because they both have pros and cons. I feel the same thing about academia and industry, right? Academia, there are very stressful times, but there are wonderful things I learned there. And one thing I enjoyed was the purity, right? The fact that you do knowledge for the sake of knowledge, right? So I learned that, and to really take the time to understand it, right? I had great mentors there. My PhD advisor was somebody who just spent, you know, put emphasis on understanding things well. I learned a lot from them and from other people. So I always had that. However, the problem with academia, at least math academia, is that the metric for winning is, can you prove the theorem, right? If I can prove it, then I have a paper, and I have a lot of papers, then I have status, and I have jobs, and I things. But to me, proving never did it. To me, understanding was more important to me than proving. Not maybe not to others, and I respect that, but I could prove things and not yet understand them, right? As a formal proof, and I could also understand things that I wasn't able to prove. So when I switched from academia to industry, that sort of win changed from being able to prove to being able to implement. And so all of a sudden, in the proofs, you care about 100% of the cases, 100%. And sometimes you take very little time proving it for 99.9% of the case, and there's a particular small part that you have to prove, and that's what's really hard. In industry, you don't care about that small piece. You care about, does it work for the bulk? In particular at Google, like I was at YouTube recommendations. If you do something that improves the metrics for a big chunk of the population, you're happy as long as you can do it fast, right? Fast and reliable. So it went from proving to being fast. And so all of a sudden you switch your point of view and you go, okay, what can I do this particular model? Well, I can, but is it fast? Because if it's not fast, it could be perfect. It's not going to work, right? So my mind shifted. And then I had something interesting, which is that none of them would do it for me, right? Like proving doesn't do it for me. Doing it fast doesn't do it for me. What does it for me? And that's when I really had to introspection. And I knew the answer all along, but I just had to put it in words. What really matters to me is understanding it in a basic way. Being able to tell a 5-year-old kid how to do it, that is what does it to me. And when I discovered that, then I know that the rest of my career is going to be spent explaining things.
Just to clarify, were you working as a machine learning engineer creating pipelines, or were you working as an ML researcher who would find a quicker way of dishing out recommendations through a faster algorithm?
Both. My title was not researcher; it was a software engineer. So there were times that I spent writing pipelines, data pipelines, and there were times that I spent doing experiments. So say I want to use this model instead of that one, or I want to predict this label, this target instead of that other one, and see if things increase. And you always care about increasing the metrics. The watch time was the metric that we had at that time. I don't know if that now it's a different one, but it's increasing the number of watch time is the main thing. So that was the target. But yeah, a lot of times I ran experiments on small sectors of the population, feeding them a different things from a different model and analyzing the difference.
Did you have on-job training? Because I don't presume that you already had that in your academics, working with cloud and DevOps and deploying and monitoring the system resources. Is that something that you learned on the job, or did you already know that?
I did not know that. No, I came in knowing very little. I knew enough programming to pass the Google interview, which is write methods and functions in Python. So the algorithms I was good at, but the coding, I didn't do that much. So it was very hard. I spent nights, learning a bunch of things. And it was, it's in particular a big companies, the production code is very complicated.
But
So it was very hard. Yeah.
why would they make you do that? Because even in a decent mid-sized company, they would have different departments for ML research and DevOps and project management and the data science. That's almost like worker abuse.
Well, I think if I had known more about how industry works, I would immediately, my first day at Google, just talk to somebody and be like, how can I leverage my skills the best? Right? I didn't have that. I didn't know that. And in my head, everything worked like academia where you just survive. So I went in and I'm like, okay, the job that I was given is software engineer. I better survive at this. And I started just working really hard and not sort of making it noticeable that I had no idea what was going on. And but yeah, that has taught me a lot, that you have to channel your strengths. I mean, I certainly wasn't even close to challenging my strengths. I learned a lot, and I'm thankful for that. But yeah, I was in a I was doing things that were so out of my comfort zone that it was difficult. Yeah.
I think in one way it really helped you grow, but in the other way, I guess big companies leverage their name to get unprecedented amount of performance out of people who would simply do it out of the honor of working in Google or Microsoft, which I guess every company kind of wants to leverage that. But let's talk about your transition from Google to something that you were born to do, Udacity. Tell me about your journey there. What did you do there? And then I guess and when I look at Udacity and I read about that and I take the courses, I can totally see the spirit that you engender in Udacity. So it's built around the vision that you have to give people the shortest possible path to the most important knowledge. It's kind of the 80-20 rule of learning, that you focus on the most important 20%, and 80% will take care of that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, when it was clear that I was not made for Google, that I was learning a lot, but it wasn't that productive. I talked with my manager, who was very supportive, and said, "Well, what is that thing that you love doing? What would you do if you had no salary? If all salary was the same?" And that's when I thought, okay, that's when teaching started to come up, and when I realized that in Silicon Valley you could also do teaching, I thought I'm going to give this a try, because I've been in academia, I've been in industry. I'm going to try to merge the two. And Udacity is definitely that. MOOCs definitely merge the two. And I saw that it was a place that I could contribute, that I was different than the rest, right? Everybody has their own level of teaching and their own way of teaching. And when I saw what they had there, I thought, okay, I really like this. Plus, I can inject my own way to do it. And I came in, and certainly that was the case. I had my angle, and I started putting in. I remember in my interview I had to give a talk, and the talk was to a bunch of people in the company who were both technical and non-technical. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna give the talk the way I do it. I explained neural networks in, I don't remember, it was the little bunnies and elephants that you had to split using the size of the ears or something like that. And I gave it like that, and I thought, okay, if they like my cartoonish methods, then they will hire me, and that's good. And if they don't like them, then I better find out quick. They loved it, and when I came in, I really started feeling like I was a part of it. I was given a team of people who were great, and they were there were animators, there were people who there we had teaching assistants. The whole infrastructure was there for me, and I just had was given the opportunity to unleash. And so I unleashed all this sort of cartoons I had in my head, and put them into one place, and we built a lot of stuff. And I also had a team of people that I was leading that team, and they had slightly different ways to teach, and that was wonderful because we would complement each other, and a lot more came out of that. So we built. I was very proud of the job we did there. We really built some really fun courses, and I learned a lot more because I had to teach things that I didn't know, and I was given the opportunity to sort of cartoonize it in my head. So it was a great learning period.
Do you think there's a child in you that tries to visualize all serious situations in a cartoonish fun way?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I always do that. Like when in every situation, I try to explain it in a fun way, and so people close to me, they know that I will bring out the napkin and start drawing, and even things that are not math, right? Like when I understand other things, I always try to do it, and explain things back to people. Sometimes when they already understand, so it's like, hey, stop it. But yeah, I always have that, and when I'm thinking to myself, I'm normally re-explaining myself some random thing sometimes. But yeah, that's sort of very much my nature.
Do you like anime, cartoon movies? Because I, for one, absolutely love movies like Frozen and Beowulf and
Yeah,
Lion King. What do you see when you see or you have time for movies or cartoons or anything at all?
yeah, I like cartoons. I like movies. Since I was a kid, I find that the narrative is amazing because I mean, think about it. We watch a movie, uh, and it's not a real scenario. It's not like we're learning history, right? We're just watching a fake scenario someone invented in their head. Uh, Somehow, you know, it'd be better use of our time to watch something that like facts, right? Because we learn. But somehow we put so much energy into watching something, and the reason is narrative because we enjoy that. We read fiction books, we watch all kind of movies because we enjoy a story. Like if you tell me a piece of gossip and you tell me half of it, I won't sleep. I'll be like, hey, come on, Minhaj, tell me the whole thing, right? Whereas if you tell me a bunch of facts and you stop in the middle, I'm like, okay, I just don't care about the rest, right? So narrative is very, very important. And I try to inject into everything I teach a narrative. I try to, even if it's a simple story, like you try to do this, but then you couldn't, and then you were saved by this algorithm, or a story about people who were trying to do this particular thing with probabilities, and then something, always a story with a beginning, a plot, a climax, and an ending. We are engineered to enjoy that, and I think education should have that because it's just a way for us to, first of all, for fun, and second of all, to remember it, right? I remember I was at an interview once, and they asked me about a hidden Markov model, and I was like, "This is like what it is. Like, tell me the formulas." And I was like, "Okay, sure." And I have a video on that, so I said, "Imagine that your friend is happy or sad based on the weather." And then the interviewer was like, no, just tell me the formulas. And I'm like, actually, I kind of have to tell you a story because I don't know the formulas. So I go, please bear with me. And I go, then this one gets happy or sad because the sun comes out. And then the formula is this because the probability is this. And then I figure out the formulas based on the story, but I couldn't have possibly come up with the formulas of a hidden Markov model if I don't have that story in my mind. So it's an easy way to remember it. That's why, to me, narrative is just the way to, it's kind of the way to, for us to learn.
I think this is the embodiment of what we were talking earlier about the fact that when you learn top to down, you have a story, and with the story, you have the numbers to go with that. And when you put them
Yeah,
together, that's the only time that you actually remember the whole sequence. Other than that, half you won't understand. And I think when I go to a lot of talks and people talk to me about how to get into data science, and I was just wondering, if that is something that's for very few people who actually learn to know mathematics from the story, and
yeah,
without one another, they cannot actually make the whole association. Listening to you actually gives me a very strong nostalgia, because I was that kid who would just take a book and go around to all my elders and ask them to read the story for me, and I'll just take the book and go to another person and ask them to read the same story, just to find out if there's a difference between how they narrate things. And then I used to work in radio as a child, so I'm very grown to ideas of stories and narratives and strong emotions, and I learned that later in life that the best way of teaching is to associate a very good and happy memory with the learning.
Absolutely.
And that's the only way that you can, place the everlasting impressions of that learning that people would never forget if you are to make a good teacher. And I was just wondering, out of that question, do you believe in the fact that there is an association between physics and or any mathematical discipline and psychology? Because you seem to be someone who is very good at understanding other people's psychology and what it would be the best way that they would learn. And now we know through research that 70% of people generally are visual learners. So they have to have some kind of orientation or 3D abstraction of the concepts. Would you call yourself someone who is good at reading people also, as well as formulas?
I try my best. I certainly there's different kinds of people, and as I said, you sort of, it's easy to empathize with the one that you are, right? And that's why, very high performing academics, it's hard for them to empathize with people who are not big abstract people, and that's why we get sort of the great researcher who's terrible at teaching. It doesn't happen to everybody, but it's in the great majority, right? So I find that I empathize a lot with visual learners like me. Something that we figured out at Udacity was, with talking to people, looking at how students were, and looking at how we were, the teachers, kind of found that there's three main types of learning. And there's no psychology research here, so I don't claim to be the authority on teaching psychology, but we found out three types. There is the visual learner, the one that has to draw with a crayon and a napkin and to a 5-year-old. That's the mental picture person. Then there is the mathematical one, the one that has to look at the formulas and understand it. There's people like that. There's people who have to work out the derivative and the board and have board full formulas to get it. Good for them. I'm not one of them, but I admire them. And then there's the third kind, which is the builder, right? So it's sort of the visual, the formulaic, if you will, and the builder, that is the one that has to make it work. So we had students and teachers who would not be content until they build the model and make it work on a data set. And the moment you do that, even if you don't understand all steps, the moment you do that, you're happy, right? So we had those three. And I had to challenge my way of teaching too, because I teach to the visual one. Like, I'll be like, oh yeah, this and this and that. And many people were like, please show me a formula or I will explode. And so I would have to sort of show the formula. And other people were like, you gave me a wonderful picture, but I wasn't able to use it in anything. So I had to write code. And I learned to do the three, way out of my comfort zone, right? Or we also had three, different teachers that we'd sort of split the job to do that. But I definitely, I think one person cannot have the full picture of anything. And so we need different types of people to help us figure out what is the best type of learner, right? It's like different frames of reference, right?
I think it's the ancient Greek lesson on rhetoric also, that you have to have three components in your speech in order to be able to make a very lasting and convincing argument, which is the logos, ethos, and pathos. And in some way, it relates to the fact that you have a story, you have numbers to go with that, and you have the passion to deliver it with confidence. And that's something that you were actually able to engender in the culture at Udacity. Why Apple then?
Yeah, there was
Did you miss free food?
two things happened. Actually, you don't get free food at Apple.
No? Oh,
No.
sad.
So you pay, it's subsidized, but yeah. But I got great great things there. Travel a lot. I so Udacity was changing into a model that they have right now, where the teachers are external and they care um, more about the administration for the teacher, right? So you would get teachers to be experts, not in-house teaching, and you would just teach them to teach or sort of help them teach. And so that was started being my role, and then it became more of a manager role, and that was fun. But I was trying to teach some more and things like that. So even I considered and may do it in the future, being a sort of external teacher at Udacity. But it got to the point that I was doing a lot more administrative things. It's great because I learned it, but it was kind of away of my comfort zone. And so I was thinking what to do. And then Apple showed up and said, "We like your YouTube channel, and we're looking for somebody who teaches the employees the same things in something called Apple University." And I thought, well, I've been here for a while at Udacity. I sort of injected a style that it remains there, and so I thought I'll give this a try and see what's up. My previous transitions have all taken me to fun places, and so I thought let's give it a try. And so I was there at Apple working at. I was a teacher basically. I was teaching in person workshops and also producing online material for the employees. And yeah, it was a great time. And also doing internal consulting. So I would talk to teams and sort of tell them how to get their problem into machine learning and stuff like that. So it was a great time. It was a great transition. I mean, I had an awesome time at Udacity, but I enjoyed the transition to Apple a lot.
Do you think it was partly because of your repressed wish to become a professor that anything that has a last name called university, you simply join it?
Maybe, yeah, maybe it was that. Or I also wanted to test the big company culture again. At Google, I enjoyed the culture a lot. Felt like I was playing catching up most of the time. So I wanted to maybe be at a big company and not catch up. We just be like there and own it.
Okay. And how did you like to be on the other end of the spectrum where people were catching up to you?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was great to. I learned from people because the people that I taught were just had many times. Some of them had a lot more technical expertise because they were actual engineers, so they would have a better chance of going and writing it in production code. Others were, and this is something I loved, completely not into machine learning. Just people from all walks of life, and they would be in the same room. So I had to play a one size fits all approach, and really that was challenging and fun. So I learned from people, I think, as much as they learned from me. And back to the in-person teaching was a lot of fun. Something that I missed. I mean, as I said, I believe a lot in online teaching, but the fact that you can see the people you teach and see their eyes and see if they're falling asleep or awake, or he's smiling when you say something and people smile, is such a huge piece of data for you. Like, it's just, so I missed that from teaching in university, and I had it again. So yeah, that's fun.
If you were to choose, and you must choose between Apple and Google to work rest of your life, which one would you choose and why?
Ooh, that's hard. They both have great things. They both have everything. It's hard for me to compare, and I'm sorry that I'm gonna ambiguous my way out of, of it, but it's hard to compare because my job at Google was the most standard job. I was a sort of regular software engineer. I never got to see what the other places are, right? I never got to see anything out of the standard. Whereas at Apple, I had my own job for me only, and I would design it myself, basically. So if I was given, yeah, no, I mean, I kind of have a very little basis of comparison in there, but I would guess that, yeah, I think probably the the products at Apple were more hardware, more technical, I would have a hard time being an engineer there. At Google, I there were a lot more sort of pure machine learning, pure like software. The products were quicker, so I think there were teams that I could be a more of an engineer there. So I think the technical aspects would suit me more there. Apple's a lot more hardware, right?
Well, to put it
But yeah,
another
it's hard to
way,
tell.
yeah, to put it another way, if there is no chance of failure, what would be your dream job that you would happily do rest of your life?
Oh, I think I've had it. I mean, I think my dream job of I think I like 50-50, right? I like explore exploit. 50% my comfort zone and 50% totally out of my comfort zone, learning new things. So a job where half of the time I do something like research or something like working on a product that I'm slow at and that I can get, learn a lot and get into things and learn from other people that do it faster. That's perfect. And then the other half would be my comfort zone, which is teaching what I'm doing, right? So it's explaining, giving, making workshops, tutorials, etc. That's sort of my perfect job because I challenge myself, but I also get to exploit what I do well.
One of the things that you do very good is to isolate the facts from the hype. And I get this question a lot, which I should throw your way, which is what's the difference between artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science?
Yeah, great question. Great question, and it's very common. There are many times used interchangeably, and it's no harm in using it interchangeably. Artificial intelligence is the main one. It's whenever a computer does anything by itself, that resembles a human. And machine learning is a part of it, which is when you do it based on data. That's a standard answer, and standard answers don't do it for me. And so I think of how do we think as humans, right? The way we make decisions, sort of in two ways, main ways. One is using sort of reasoning and logic, right? Like if you teach me something and I just learn it, and or if I'm thinking, trying to rationalize things. But the other one is by experience, right? Like if I walk in a particular street 10 times, and 9 out of the 10 times that the same dog bites me, I don't have any. I don't know anything about the street or about the dog or about anything. I just know the things that happen to me, the experience. And when I make a decision based on that experience, that's machine learning. When I make a decision based on anything else, which is could be experience, but it could also be analyzing, uh, looking at probabilities, things like that, then I'm using AI, right? And data science, that's a term that encompasses a lot of things. I would say that it's hard to tell between data science and machine learning. If I would maybe say that's more technical. If you do machine learning, you may be a more technical person. You may be more into, and you probably write more code. If you're a data scientist, you probably do more analyzing algorithms. Just because machine learning would have the title machine learning engineer, whereas data scientist has the title scientist. So I would assume that that's the difference.
Okay. Now, excuse me. Now, it's about time that we put the rubber to the road, and I'm going to ask you the question. But interestingly, before I ask the questions, I actually have to tell you the rules to answer that question
Okay,
first
let's
now.
do it.
And it seems to be very complicated questions for most people, but I assume not for you. But then to walk the talk, you have to explain it to people without
Okay.
overcomplicating that. So no Shor's algorithm, no Grover's algorithm, no quantum entanglement or gating or teleportation. What's quantum physics?
Quantum physics. Okay, great. I actually I'll tell you more quantum computing because I'm not that much expert in quantum physics.
Anything that has a name quantum, just tell us that it's
Yeah,
not supernatural.
yeah. So this is something that I'm learning right now. So I'm in the process of this is work in progress. So but this is kind of what I look at it. A bit, right? Like a, a classical bit in a computer is a one or a zero, right? It's like a switch that is on or off. So if I want to transmit information, I can only transfer one bit, which is one yes no question, right? And a computer takes those bits and operates with them and changes them, and you, if you're able to encode your problem, get the computer to work with the bits, and the solution comes out. That's a computer. A quantum computer then uses a qubit, which is more than a bit. So the first mental image I have of a qubit is a, a normal bit is an on and off switch, like the light switch, and a qubit is, you could think of it as a slider, right? Like the dimmer, like that you put on high or no light, or like on romantic in the middle, like dim light. And so all of a sudden you can store a lot more information because you can store any number from 0 to 1, and that's a lot more than two things. That's infinitely many things. You have infinitely many states. Now there's more, because the state that is half turned on, half turned off, can be, there's many different ways to look at it. The way it is an electron that is on spin up or spin down, whatever that means, but you can have it on spin half, but in different ways. I can show you a bunch of different atoms that are in spin half that are different. Sorry, qubits that are different. And so imagine that there were two, one spin up, and this is spin up, this is spin down, and there's this half, but there's also this half. So all of a sudden I have a circle, right? There's the full spin up, the full spin down, and every other one has two possibilities. So my dimmer is more of a circle dimmer, right? Now there's even more, because I can also point in every direction. So it's actually a sphere. So the way I imagine a qubit is a sphere. Imagine if your light switch was a sphere and you can put it on full up, full on, full off, but also in the middle, or in 70-30, or in 10-90, and you have an entire spheres and circles possibilities for that one. So that's a qubit, right? Now, that seems like cheating, because I can store any kind of information like that. I have infinitely many possibilities for my qubit. So if I want to store the entire Wikipedia, I just put it on a long number between 0 and 1, and I put the qubit for that number. So what's the catch? I can't go from two pieces of information to infinite. And the catch is that the information is there, but the moment you observe it, it collapses, right? And so your switch is in half on, half off, but the moment you look at it, it goes, either decides, make up its mind, either it goes full on or full off. And you'll never know
Do
what
you
came
like
up.
Schrodinger's cat metaphor for that?
I think it's interesting. Yeah, it's weird. It's a weird metaphor, but it's that, right? Like the cat is in a superposition of alive and dead, and it's not like it's very different to say that you don't know what it is, that to be in a superposition. If I have a cat and I know it's alive or dead, but I don't tell you, for you, the cat is in a it's half probability to be alive and half probability to be dead. But to be in an actual superposition of both at the same time, it's different. The math is different, right? And so what is quantum computing, right? Like, you want to use all this information, and so what you do is manipulate qubits in the same way that you manipulate a bit by doing a not operator, an and operator, an or operator. You can manipulate qubits, and when if you do it in a smart way, the moment you observe, you'll get an answer to your question. So you don't get everything for free, but you do get some perks, and you can use these perks to solve problems in a much harder problems. And then there's entanglement, which is a completely different a mind-blowing thing,
To
right?
quote Richard Feynman, and he said, that I can safely say that no one understands in quantum physics, which I guess by proxy includes quantum information,
Yeah.
mathematics, computing, anything. I'm just wondering, the way you explain it, my grandmother can understand that, but why was Einstein so against that?
He was against what? Explaining?
The basic premise of quantum physics, because he didn't actually believe that it's something that, because to put it in your words, it seems like it's cheating, which frankly is for a lot of people. I mean,
Yeah.
what does it even mean between 0 to 1? I mean, you can shove whole world and universe between 0 and 1 if you wanted to.
Yeah, exactly.
And in physics, unless you have measured and found the superposition, you didn't do a breakthrough research, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, it's like, I think to answer your first question, Einstein was against it because it was very weird to him that there was randomness, right? Like the sort of scientific way to look at things is, if I were to replicate an experiment to the atom, everything the same, I will get the same results. If I am put into the same universe and replicate an experiment, I get the same thing. But quantum measurement says no, it's random. You get a yes or you get a no, and you could run the exact same experiment and get a different answer. So to him, I think that was weird, and that's why he said God does not play dice with the universe, right? And I, I think he was questioning this until later in his life, and I don't know what his last idea was, but he definitely uh, questioned this, and many other physicists do. And I don't think I agree with Feynman that nobody fully understands quantum physics. Now that I've been able to talk to experts, they they look
I
at it a
think you
lot.
should cut him some slack. It was like what, 40 years ago or even more than
Oh no,
that.
he's genius. I don't question. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So yeah, certainly, I'm not criticizing him, but
That's fine.
I
So we
think
have a
when I
question
talk,
here. If you can
oh
actually
yes,
take it while we talk about that.
sure.
And what I know from the research so far, um, quantum computing is something that has recently appeared into the latest trends in Gardner report in 2021 for leaders. It seems to have a realization timeline of 4 to 5 years. But the most disputable in my little research and the papers that I've read and the books that I've read, the interesting question is that what are the practical applications of quantum computing as we speak? And you do a lot of work at Zapata Computing about that, and we're going to be talking about that. But what are some of the practical application as of now that we can do that? I only know that so far quantum computing is an aid to existing machine learning pipeline. If you
Yeah,
could expand on
it
that.
is. Yeah, I would say hard to say practical applications, more like potential. There are some wins that one can see, some, but I would imagine like how the state of an airplane when the Wright brothers were building it, it was no practical application because you would whatever you would do it, you go faster by walking or a bicycle, but there was the potential, right? So you say, okay, practical application is maybe one day I'll be able to cross the Atlantic in one of these weak planes, right? So that's where we are in quantum computing, maybe a little ahead, but there have been problems of the quantum supremacy has been achieved in a very special problem that was built for quantum supremacy, right? But I don't think we're that far from being able to start getting applications that are practical. Right now, a lot of them are theoretical. A lot of them are whenever we have a quantum computer this big, we'll be able to such and such and such and such. And those are absolutely fascinating. I mean, the things you can do just from being able to do linear search in a faster than linear time, to me is fascinating, right? Like if I'm looking for something in 100 slots and I don't have to do order of 100, but I have to do order of square root of 100. To me, that's fascinating, right? Shor's algorithm, right? Like being able to factor big numbers is gonna completely break cryptography. just basically anything. But if you don't mind, I'll just for a minute, you asked me about the aid, right? Like it is definitely an aid, right? The quantum computer, we're not going to have pure quantum computers, right? In the same way that we don't have pure airplanes that are always hovering in the air, right? They behave like a car most of the time, and they only use the wings when they need to. Computers will be like that. It'll be most of the time a classical computer. You enter your data as a classical computer, you process it as a classical computer. At some point, you turn it into quantum, into qubits, and do some calculation that's really hard for a classical computer. And then you bring it back and analyze the results with a classical computer. So it's mostly classical, and the quantum is there to help you with the bottleneck.
Very interesting. One of the papers that I read that you published at Zapata Research, and I see a lot of their videos, and I was just wondering if you were the one who instilled that culture. There was this video about squeezing the juice out of research on
Yeah, that's a great
YouTube
one.
channel. It's a super fun video,
Yeah,
and it's
that's a great
super
video.
nice.
Yeah.
Did you have anything to do
I
with
wish
that?
no, I didn't have anything to do. I think that was Peter and the other people from Zapata who are really they really care about that. I mean, there's at Zapata, there's a culture of trying to make
Yeah,
this.
they must actually, if they want people to get interested in that, because otherwise, it's your proverbial old physics professor standing in front of a whiteboard.
Yeah,
But
that's
anyways, what I wanted to talk about is that one of the papers that I read, and that's a very fascinating concept for me, specifically in classification problem. The edge where quantum computing can deliver a little bit more is that right before when you have data input data and it's about to make classification, there's a prior. And in prior, where the classical machine learning pipeline ends and the quantum computing has been handed off the task of finally classifying between 0 and 1, it clusters because the basic premise is that everything is between 0 to 1. The premise, I'm not able to actually explain the whole paper because it's a lot complicated, but it does a better job than classifying in comparison with the classical algorithms. Do you think, what are some of the fields where quantum computing's performance or accuracy surpasses classical algorithms by far?
That we have right now, there's nothing by far other than the very examples that you cook up for quantum supremacy. But you are definitely hitting the nail in the head in that the prior is something that is that it's very that quantum computers have a lot of potential in working with, right? So for example, generative models are something that we're very interested in for many reasons.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's the paper that you guys published where it recreated the CIFAR handwritten numbers exactly the way it was in the training data sets, and quantum computers were able to do that. It was unbelievable the kind of accuracy that they had.
Yeah, that was a great paper by some of my teammates, Manuel, Alejandro, and others. They did a wonderful job because what happens is this: you're generating. Let's forget about classification for a moment. Classification is sort of done well in classical computers. So a problem to pick is a hard one, right? Generation is hard for classical computers. So what the question is, where can you put in a little quantum part into a generative model to be able to improve not just speed but also performance, right? And so what do generative models do? They take, for example, images and they encode them into like a much smaller space, the latent space or the prior, right, that you mentioned. And then they take points out of the prior and blow them back up into images. And I'm saying images, but I meant any kind of data that you wanted to generate. And so a face, for example, you have a data set of faces. It encodes it into a much smaller space because a face has many. If you take a pixel for every, if every dimension that you have in an image is a pixel, your space is humongous and the points are all over the place. You manage to crunch that with a generator or autoencoder or whatever it is into a much smaller space where if you hope that, let's say you put all the faces into a little cube. If I pick a random point out of this cube and bring it back up, I get a new face that I hadn't seen before, right? So that's generation. Now here is something interesting. If I manage to take the whole space of faces and bring it down into a small square or a small cube or a small dimensional space, who tells me that the distribution of faces inside that little square is uniform? I have no guarantee that if I pick a random point, it's going to be a face. It could easily be that I bring them all into a square and all of them are here and some of them are here, but there's nothing in other sides, right? So thinking that a generative model that a prior is uniform, or for that matter, even Gaussian or anything, it's not. I'm not going to go as far as saying it's naive, but it's
sorry to interrupting right? you, but isn't what discriminator is for?
Absolutely, but searching inside that space is not something you do in generative models. You just pick a random point out of there. But what if some points are better than others? Right? So what if there is another distribution inside that space where you can pick you're more likely to pick a face? And so two things happen. One, the space is small enough for a functioning quantum computer. And two, there's a potential for improving because you can model a distribution using a quantum computer. Now, what is so special about modeling distributions? We can model distributions classically, right? We have our restricted Boltzmann machines. We have a bunch of algorithms that if you feed it a bunch of data, it starts generating similar data. Why a quantum computer? Well, many reasons, but one is that generation is immediate for a quantum computer because it's observation, right? If I have a quantum circuit, I can generate things immediately. I just say, put in some qubits in state 0, and what comes out, observe it, and you get something. And if you do it again and observe it, you get something different. And if you do it again and observe it, you get something different, fully random from that distribution. On the other hand, classical models may be hard. If you have a restricted Boltzmann machine, it can wonderfully model your distribution, but picking out of it is hard. It's sometimes intractable. You have to do some small algorithms like that sort of pick a pseudo-random point out of there. But if you want to pick a fully random point, you need a lot of computing power. So generating comes easy for quantum computers, right?
But let's put that in perspective. Pit these two computing models against each other. So one, I recently actually published, and along with the video, they use StyleGAN2, which was originally published by Schaubekind's research. And then they have a huge data set, around 250,000 pictures at NVIDIA. And they created a generative model from that, which could be used for transfer learning. If we take this model, and now, by the way, they have the second version of that also called StyleGAN2. So if we use that, and then we also use the quantum computing model for the same training data set, what are the improvements that quantum algorithms would make in comparison with the classical ones in terms of both the accuracy, the computation power, the time, the precision? This paper that they've written, they haven't actually addressed the theoretical side of supermassive quantum algorithms. If you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, there's two ways that you can evaluate a generative model. One of them is how the quality of the, I'm going to say images, but the quality of the data. How much does your data point look like a data point from the original set? How perfect the face is. And the other one is diversity, right? Like how much are you exploring the entire space? Am I drawing a very similar face for every time? Or am I capturing different genders, different races, different everything, right? Different positions, different expressions. And so you can get them both together with something called inception score. And so, but it's hard to tell how much of each one you have, right? So in experiments with MNIST data set in this recent paper that was published by the folks in my team, there are improvements in the inception score. And so there are studies of like how much did you improve quality, how much you improve this. But these are the first steps to be made. First of all, to get more results in that direction and harder data sets on more higher scores. and also to understand what is it. I mean, I think there's a belief that there just may be things that a quantum computer might be able to model that a classical hasn't, right? There may be those distributions.
Yeah, I guess there's an obvious sign of you can put your trust in that based on the handwritten digit paper. The result was very obvious that the highest classical algorithm couldn't actually produce the kind of results that quantum algorithm did. But let's talk about a place where you guys are working tirelessly on that, Zapata computing. I'm very inspired by the kind of research that they're producing there, and the effort and the dedication you're putting in that. I've had a little bit of conversation with Christopher Savoie, who's your founder. And but before I had that, how is that to actually work with someone like Alan Espura Guzik? The guy has produced 553 research papers.
Yeah, the genius.
I hope he's not listening, but that's insane.
Yeah, I don't know how he does it. Yeah, I don't work. I've met him and I've talked to him, and he's a wonderful human being. He's actually one of the ones that you can, if he doesn't tell you it's a quantum physics, this kind of researcher. He sounds like just like a normal person that you would have a normal conversation with, right? Like he explains things in a simple
And
way.
what
And
some of his videos, and it was very natural that the way he actually explained those complicated concepts, and I could see an older version of you in him also. And I was just wondering that how's that working with him, who's at the cusp of quantum computing. So he's the kind of person, if he told me about a concept in quantum computing, generally I'm very skeptic about everything unless I've read something. But if he told me something, I said, just forget the papers, he's probably right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't have, he's into his research group and at the university, and so we see him. I talk to him sometimes, but the real influence that he has on me is through his students and postdocs, right? Because I work daily with his former students. My manager is one of his former students, and his postdocs and everything, and he has injected that sort of way of thinking into them. So I talk to them a lot, and yeah, definitely it's a sort of global perspective. Like I don't think he, and when I say he, I mean him and his group, I don't think they see barriers, right? Which is something that tends to be a big mistake if an academic does it. They look at the quantum, they look at the chemical aspects of quantum computing. They look at the physical aspects, of the computational aspects, of the machine learning aspect, the mathematical aspects, that they all sort of work together, and they don't. It's never a matter of like, oh no, this is your thing and this is my thing. It's always trying to understand all of them at the same time, right? For the material side, from the all of it. And so I've learned a bit of that, and I've been learning. I'm still in the learning process, so there may be questions you ask me that I'm like, wow, I don't know idea. But I definitely appreciate that there's no barriers, that all of it is seen as a one discipline, even and not spawning several different disciplines.
I assume that would be a very enriching learning experience because he himself comes from a chemistry background, and seeing a lot of interdisciplinary top researchers working together, that must have been a very amazing place to be. And I would love to have him on show if you could actually make the time. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you is that you have a product called Orquestra at Zapata Computing. And the concept itself is wonderful because a lot of companies are now investing in huge wins in the future and near-term devices. Microsoft has its own version of quantum computing, and then IBM has its Qiskit, and a lot of other companies and individuals in Chinese government research, they're doing a lot of work on that. And it's kind of the matter of time who gets there first. And I was just wondering, Orquestra provides a workflow platform for all these developments so that we have some kind of uniform experience, and we're able to integrate all these efforts, so you can specify your backend and your ansatz and other specifications. Tell us a little bit about Orquestra state of maturation. Do you work with that directly? Or?
Yeah, I do. I use it, and write some algorithms on it, and it's wonderful because it is kind of putting it all together, right? If you are a company or a research group, and you have some code written here, some code written there, and you pass it to a friend and a notebook, and they try it again, but they don't have the packages, or they some code is written in certain language and some in another. So, and also for putting it in production, anything like that, reproducing experiments, uh, it's it's basically is very useful for, and also for using different quantum computers, right? Like you can use the one in Honeywell, the one in Rigetti, IBM, Google, everything, using the same pipeline. So all you do is you put the right specifications, right? And you make workflows of code where the output of here goes to here, and etc. So it really makes it easy for anybody who wants to use quantum computers with all their power, right? And it's sort of language agnostic. You can have, if you write on Penny Lane and your friend writes on Qiskit, you can still both put it together, all of that. So it's absolutely fascinating. And for classical computing, it's also useful because you can just not send it to a quantum computer, and you have all of a sudden a workflow for classical computers, right?
I'm really looking forward to actually receive the credential. I've already applied for that, and see
Wonderful.
and play with that, how it works. Let's go to a more metaphysical question here. So now that we know that back in the time we already knew about the atoms and molecules and things like this, but quantum computing actually get us to the subatomic particle level, where if you know the position of one particle, so you know like you were explaining the metaphor of the up and down direction. So if you know the position of the up spin, you already know where the downspin would be on the other end of the universe and spectrum. So I was just wondering, a lot of those things were voodoo and science fiction, like a lot of things are now. I mean, 100 years ago, people would call airplanes some kind of hearsay. I was just wondering, would that explain God and angels and ghosts? Would you call yourself a religious person?
That's interesting. I'm a spiritual person for sure. It's a very important part of my life, and so I try to understand everything that way too. And yeah, quantum computing certainly puts things together. This is something that I once learned, and it has decided my life, which is that with your mind you create, right? We're not passive. We're not passive in this world and just observing, but we create with our mind. So if you want something, if you think about it and visualize it in your head, you can make it real, right? And that's something that just it's inspirational, and it's a nice way to live life, thinking that you are in an active role where you create, and to see that in small particles, that is the case, because when you observe them, you make that decision, right? You change the universe by observing it. You're not just passively looking. So to me, those two things tie in together beautifully, right? The fact that your mind is so powerful that it can create everything. And actually, I love that in Spanish, the word for believe and the word for create are the same in one tense, right? Creer, crea y crea, right? And so that to me ties in together, and I wasn't expecting it, but two ideas that I think very strongly, right?
I've always tried, and I haven't talked to anyone about this concept that I had, because I have this propensity of thinking very deeply about human psychological systems and collective destiny of human beings, and then use machine learning and some kind of engineering or sine cos tan-edge or sigmoid function to kind of measure the social aspect of how human beings think. And I was just wondering, do you think that the our world or universe itself is a closed system like we have in physics. So there's certain amount of energy there. If it's totally isolated system, nothing's coming in and nothing's going out. So what happens within this system? It's a closed system. So if you move atoms on the right side, so there would be atoms on the left side would be compressed, and then they would go under it or somewhere, and take this position. So it's everything is interconnected. Do you think human ethics in terms of karma is also real? So what we do in the world, everything has its impact.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great analogy. I mean that in science, every cause has an effect, and also in our lives, in what we do, right? Everything that we do has a cause and effect. So I definitely believe in karma, and that we, more than as a punishment, is I see it as a learning process, right? Like if you did something negative, you must learn to and use it as a growth opportunity. So I do believe that also has a there's also cause and effect there.
I think I have a question here also, which is very relative to what I was thinking. I was listening to a talk between Lex Friedman and Francois Collet, which is the founder of Keras. And I think Francois Collet is known for his work for Keras. But what I find more interesting about his work is his Kaggle competition on ARC, and his paper also on intelligence, where he wants to truly create a system, an artificial intelligence system that would teach itself in situations which it's not programmed for. So it truly is intelligent. And I think this question relates a lot to what I've been thinking for quite some time, is that will we actually truly be able to create systems that are good for situations that they're not trained for? Like, there is, to put it in more machine learning terms, there is no training data set. It collects the information on the go. It learns just like human beings do. So we're talking about, if I go on this street and 9 out of 10 this dog always bites me. So you don't have to be thinking like a neural network to paint the picture. I mean, you don't want to get bitten, find another road. So is that something that machines will be able to learn also?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. That there's things that machines do great, but there's things that humans still do so much better, right? Like, we learn from one data point. Like, if I tell you what a new thing is, you know it already, right? And there's the fact that we can do different things, right? Like, a machine learning system can do one thing, but then we have to build another one for another thing. So it's like transfer learning, right? Does my knowledge about types of fruits help me with something different, walking in the street or something like this? This is something that needs to be explored, and a lot more, right? And I think you mentioned something like, I guess in the style of meta learner, right? Which is, can machine learning models sort of train other models? Can they build, like, we build them with a purpose, but can I build one with a purpose of building machine learning models? And I think we're going in that direction. And I think this is, I can't predict the future, but I think this is definitely something that will happen.
There's one other person who's very similar to you, and he's a very good friend of mine, and I always love to talk to him. He was on my show a couple of weeks ago. Josh Starmer, and he also
Oh,
has a
yeah,
YouTube
yeah,
channel.
I'm a big fan
Absolutely
of this.
fantastic guy,
Yeah, he's great.
wonderful person to talk to. And I was talking to him about self-driving cars, and he has had the test drive in Tesla Model 3, and he absolutely loved it. But he wasn't too sure that he is going to be the first person to be sitting in a driverless car. Where do you stand on that?
I'm a big fan. I mean, I think you can use machine learning to save lives by reducing accidents, and by uh, really, like, uh, save ourselves a lot of time and a lot of resources. I think it's wonderful. But obviously, there's some, it's a problem. Most machine learning models, all of them, make some mistakes, right? So what's a small rate of mistakes? And most of the, for training a self-driving car, most scenarios, the car knows exactly what to do. In most roads, they can get, let's say you get 99% accuracy. That's wonderful, but well, it's not, because if you're making a mistake every 100, like it's a lot of accidents and it's a lot of people that are harmed are dead, right? So how do you make it better? And that 1% is much harder. And out of that 1%, 99% of that 1% is still easy, but is that little tiny one. The question is, when are you content? And not only that, if you compare, like we hear every time a Tesla has an accident, or we hear about it on all the news, right? But when do we hear about when humans have an accident, right? That happens a lot
every
more.
day.
So we need to, yeah, it's also a challenge on us to be comfortable with the unknown. Like, would I go in a driverless car whose accident rate is this, or would I go in a car with a driver whose accident rate is this? Well, I know this one, like but I don't know this one. This could go very wrong. So we need to be more comfortable with machine learning models, and that's something that is only gained with time, I think. Because even myself, like I'm a little like I would love to, I've been the chance to be in self-driving cars, and it's wonderful, but there's always that level of, am I ready to leave it? I think both. They will get better and better and better, and one day they will perform better than humans, and humans will get better and better at being confident, and then one day will be like natural, like we are with airplanes. We used to not, people used to be very scared, and now they're, the majority are more comfortable. So I think it's definitely I'm a big fan of self-driving cars.
I think Elon Musk has a point here where when he talks about the numbers, but if you have a data-driven approach to things, the math is very clear. So you have a better chance of surviving an accident, or let's put it that way, you are more safe in a driverless car as it's in comparison to driving yourself, or at least that's what the numbers show us. Do you think that has more to do with human psychology? Because we know from the fact that human beings are more worried about negative consequences than they're happy about the positive consequences.
Yeah.
And do you think people would rather die driving cars by themselves than dying in an accident that's done by a self-driving car?
Yeah,
It's
I
kind of a
mean,
limbic system takes over.
yeah, negative consequences are always the ones that create news. So you don't get to hear, if you hear numbers of like, oh, the rate of accidents decreased by this much, doesn't mean anything. But if you see the results from accidents, it goes inside you, right? And I think for things that, for the majority of cases, the driverless car will do better than a human. But there may be that one case that the driverless car has never seen before, and it would be easy for a human, and the driverless car just does something embarrassing, and then that's what people are scared of, right? What would happen? And so that's why, what your previous question, we need to train models that can handle things that they've never seen. That's very hard. But yeah, I mean, I think the big fear would be to have the car do something that a human could easily do, and the car mess it up. Uh, in the same way that image recognition, right? Like, it tends to work even better than humans, but there's that one particular thing that totally fools it. Like a muffin with 3 blueberries, and it goes, "That's a dog," and the human would be like, "No, it's not." But I think that's what people are scared, rightfully, of, because it's a little embarrassing, right? It would be a bad way to have an accident, right? But I'm hopeful that we'll get over it.
Well, people like us who work in blue chip companies, you work in Google and Apple, there's a lot of concern regarding privacy and how AI ethics is evolving. So we have this recent firing of Tim Gebru,
Yeah.
who was at Google, and then Facebook came up with this ridiculous WhatsApp privacy policy where they could sell anyone's data to anyone. So there are huge concerns every day that we hear about when it comes to big companies. And I'm not sure people have a lot of confidence anymore in these big companies. And with technology playing a part in our lives, which is almost inevitable now, do you see any concerns for morality, privacy, and ethics in this
Yes.
domain? And what are your biggest concerns?
Of course, I think humans are the biggest concern. I think we can, as in the same way that you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, we have a good part and a bad part, right? And if you give people power, it can be anything, right? You can, with gunpowder, you can do wonderful things, but you can do horrible things, right? With fire, you can do both wonderful things and terrible things. And I think data is not, and technology is not an exception. You can use it for good, but you can also use it for evil. And I think there needs to be two things: education and accountability. And right now we don't have any of those. uh, Nobody teaches us what the people teach us, sort of how to do things, but not what things should be done or not, right? So there's a lot of emphasis on the coding and the models, but there's nothing on ethics, right? On what you should do, what should not do. And it's very easy for people to make a mistake there. And another one is accountability. I mean, there needs to be laws that prevent this. There needs to be punishment when this is done, not just a slap on the wrist, right? And big companies just tend to not face consequences. They're and this is in tech and not in tech. I mean, when a company sometimes even factor in the consequences into their model, and they say, okay, well, the probability that I get caught is this, and the fine is this, so expected values of what I spend is still better if I break the law than if I don't. That needs to stop happening, right? We need to have accountability for both, for companies and for the models too, right? Have you seen that there are models to rate teachers, for example? There are models that are used to fire a teacher in a public school or to give them a bonus
I
based
think
on data.
I don't know if you're familiar with that, and I think that was one of the most eye-opening talk for me by Dr. Cynthia Rudy, where she compares the Project Compass, where black prisoners were more likely to be denied the parole
Of
in
course,
the prison system, and that's
of course,
horrible
that's
because
horrible.
they've been already long enough in jail system and they've had it bad throughout the history of U.S. And on top of that, there's a system that systematically discriminates against them. It's a huge reason to be
Yeah,
concerned about.
that is huge because our data is biased and our models are not accountable. So the model, for example, that helps fire that decides if a teacher gets fired, nobody knows how it works. Like, people don't know exactly what the weights are, what it is. It's hidden behind a black box. So you have a model can have accountability on someone's career, but there's no accountability on the model. Nobody can come and analyze it. So that's terrible. And the data that we have is tremendously biased. I mean, we've been racists and sexist and a lot of other things for centuries, and now we're training models with that data. So of course the models are gonna be racist and sexist and xenophobic in every possible way. And another problem, even beyond that, is that we feed the data back, right? And then make decisions based on that, and then train them all again. So there's a feedback loop,
So
which
it's
is
a compounded nonsense.
yeah. So what happens that the model doesn't know. The model thinks, okay, if you're doing a model for the police for crime, for detecting crime, then it goes, okay, where have I put more people in jail? Oh, in the poor neighborhood. So let's send more police there. And then they find more petty crime there, like drug possession or something. And then the model goes, fantastic, I did wonderful because I predicted that there's going to be more crime there. I sent police there, and there indeed was more crime there. Well, I ask you, what happens if you send police to the richest neighborhood? Oh, you're going to find drugs. Oh, you're going to find domestic abuse. You're going to find a lot of things, right? So you cannot, you could be very, very, very careful with feedback loops that just confirm the same biases that have existed and makes them worse. And then, pat yourself in the back with amazing metrics that mean absolutely nothing. So there has to be, as I said, education and accountability for everything, for people, for models, for companies, and for data.
I think there are very positive applications of the same also. I was talking to Håkan about emotional psychology. He's an expert on that. And he does a lot of work in how human expressions and the data from their behaviors can actually help identify the most discriminated or isolated people also. For example, in Norway, what they're trying to do at the moment is that they're working on an algorithm which identifies the neighborhoods which has the lowest socioeconomic status indicators, and especially the immigrant population, to identify people who are more likely to actually get into the crime. Because one of the reasons to get into petty crimes is poverty, and of course the isolation and discrimination. So if you could identify these neighborhoods and people, we're more likely to help them in a better way in terms of education programs and scholarships and other opportunities that would fit them into the mainstream. And I was just wondering, is this the ambivalence or the gray area in which huge companies actually play with? So, you could play a foul play also, but then again, you can call this the opportunity of helping the poor and the destitute and then still get away with that. Do you think that when you're large enough and you're rich enough, you get away with all kinds of discrimination?
Absolutely, absolutely. Just the way the rules are made. I mean, if a poor person robs a bank, no, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but there's an entire police force for that, right? But if a rich person doesn't pay their employees well or makes wage theft and stuff, there's not a force for that, right? That's permitted. That's completely allowed, and who will be able to fight against that if the poor people can't afford a lawyer, right? So there's a rigged, tremendously rigged system that operates, and we should not perpetuate it. Right?
Don't you think there is an inherent bias in people that help them? And then that's one of the theories in social psychology also. There's also an in-group and out-group. And no matter what happens, how heinous the crimes from the in-group are committed, they're always right. So think of it in some term, some sort of nationalism, or it could be religious messianism, or it could be patriotism, or anything that would help you protect the criminals no matter how wrong they are. So you just come out of horrible 4-year presidency of Trump. I don't know if you were in the US at the time or not. And I think, and that's so for someone who's lived in Germany for quite some time, I speak fluent German, and I've studied a lot of history, and I've lived in Berlin for some time. Isn't it like a sad moment in history where we are still celebrating the fall of a wall, where there's another guy who talks about building a wall?
Building a wall. Yeah. I mean, I think from Germany, I admire that they study their history carefully and try not to make the same mistakes, right? Other places tend to erase the history or sort of beautify it, right? Saying, oh yeah, the settlers came and the Indians decided to move to give them some space, and they were friends and traded back. No, there was a genocide, right? There's a horrible genocide a few hundred years ago, and then there was slavery, and then there was all these horrible things, and they, if you don't talk about them, if you don't make people study them carefully and accept your errors, you're going to commit them again. And that's, I think, what we're seeing with the Trump presidency. All these things came back, and it's again what we talked about before, that the empathy is always easier when the person looks like you, right? Like it's always easy to allow that. If you have either a person that resembles you or a person that resembles your dreams, right? Like if my hopes and dreams are to one day be a billionaire, then I'm just kinder to billionaires than I am to the poor people, because maybe I just don't have to, I don't see myself there. Even though the majority of people are a few bad months away from being homeless, much more than they are a few good months away from being billionaires, right? But people don't see that. They have this idea, and then there's just a lot more empathy for crimes committed in the top than in the bottom, right? And I think that's a huge problem.
Do you think artificial intelligence can help us get rid of discrimination based on data also? Because I've studied abroad also, and you probably have this felt also, and we recently had this huge movement restart with Black Lives Matter, with George Floyd and everything. What was your experience? I hear Canada in comparison is way better than a lot of other places, but there's still times where you would think that you possibly are denied a promotion or a job based on the fact that you're an immigrant. But generally, do you think artificial intelligence can actually help us, identifying those biases and preventing the coming doom, or even historically repeating our mistakes? I was in Auschwitz when I was a student back then, backpacking in Europe, and there was a wonderful thing on the wall written there, and I don't remember who said that, but it was like history is doomed to repeat itself if we do not learn from it. So do you think that technology gives us some hope?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I think regardless of technology, the last few years we've noticed a lot of things that we hadn't noticed before. All these movements, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, all this, and we need a lot more of those, have been sort of awakening us, because when you have privilege, you don't notice it, right? Like, how many people have to see this until they go, oh yeah, this people of a different gender or preference or race are suffering a lot more, and I don't get to see it. So there's definitely that. As for how much artificial intelligence can help, I mean, I hope it can. I mean, I hope that by bringing education to everybody, we can just have a, when you have when you have educated people, they believe uh less things. They analyze more and they think more. I think if you can, my dream is to give everybody the same opportunities of education, and AI can definitely help there. So if you're able to spread the message and make people critical since the very beginning, then I think that can indirectly help in those causes. And I hope there are other ways. I haven't thought of other ways, but I really hope that AI can help us build a better society in more than one ways.
I think one of the ways in which you are contributing, especially, and I have not seen that done very often by other contributors, is that you're also making videos in Spanish,
Yeah,
which is one of the most spoken languages around the world. And I was just wondering,
yeah,
why aren't there many of those? So it's probably one of the fantastic ways of contributing back to people
yeah.
who don't have as good as you, or didn't have the opportunities, or didn't actually find the good mentors at right time. So that's such a wonderful contribution. Do you plan to make more of those?
Thank you. Yes, yes. I think I'd like to make all my videos in Spanish as well. I've made a bunch of them, and they're sort of lagging. I translate them. I make new videos in English and then translate them to Spanish. So my goal is to have them all in Spanish, and I try to give as many talks as possible in Spanish, because yeah, I mean, many people speak English, but many people don't, and even the ones who do, like, learning something new, uh, it's much easier in your language because you're not trying to translate everything at the same time. Like, your entire brain is focused on learning, as opposed to half of it translating, and you only get the other half to figure things out. So I definitely enjoy. That's one of my favorite things, is to reach out and talk to people in Spanish, and think people are really needed, and that are able to get an opportunity with free material and with online education, and just seeing the stories of people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to have had the opportunity and succeed. I think it's just makes everything worth.
Do you plan to translate your book into Spanish also?
Yeah, absolutely. In the future, it'd be a
And how
great
often do
project.
you go back home?
I'm right now here in Colombia, but roughly every 2 years. I try. Sometimes it's an average, but the variance is high. So sometimes I come a lot, and sometimes I spend a lot of times not. But I try.
Um, for me, reverse culture shock is a real thing. When you meet your friends back home, now that you've lived most of your life outside Colombia, how does it feel, going back home, meeting old friends, walking the streets that you have done as children? Does it bring back memories?
Oh, many. Yeah, it's a very interesting experience, because in some way I feel so much from here. Like it makes me realize I feel like a stranger in most places, because here I feel like so much like everyone else. But at the same time, when I open my mouth, I know it's different. I have different ways of thinking, and different just ideas. And when I talk to my friends, we've had not better or worse, but just different experiences. And so we were so similar growing up, and right now we have ideas that have changed so much that I find it fascinating. It's like really feeling from here and not feeling from here all at the same time. It's like a superposition. Right?
Do you go to bank?
Do I go to what? To the bank?
To your mother's bank, where you used to go as a
Oh,
child?
it don't exist anymore. I think it
Oh,
got
really?
it, yeah, it was called Banco Cafetero, like Coffee Growers Bank, which is a very Colombian name for a bank. I think it got bought by another bank, and now it's different. So the building now has a different name, and yeah. So no, but
Okay. Do you have good coffee there also?
oh yeah, oh amazing,
Really?
amazing.
I was in
Yeah, yeah.
Rwanda last year, and
Oh no.
where the best coffee goes from there. And I was just wondering. I haven't been to South America yet. So I'm really looking forward to it. So, what would you recommend me to have once I'm in Bogota?
Yeah, I mean definitely coffee. The so Juan Valdez is pretty good. There's a coffee chain that is. I think they get good coffee from here, because a lot of the coffee here is from elsewhere, because the coffee that's here is good, and so they sell it and they buy from other places. So you don't get the Colombian coffee everywhere, but certainly the coffee is very soft, and it's very good. I actually have my in-laws had where actually they have an outside, they grow some coffee, and so I had coffee that was picked like 2 days ago, coffee that was picked and roasted right there in front of me. So it was
Nice.
delicious. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have any regrets in life? Some things that you wish you could have done, but you didn't get the chance to do.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, anything you learn is a regret, right? Because anything that I did in a certain way and I changed my mentality, I've changed my mentality a lot. Become much more open-minded than I was when I was young, when I just grew up in a society that wasn't. So yeah, things I said, or things I kind of half regretted and half very thankful that I think and act in different ways, right? Things that I go would actually go back and change. I think I would try to learn different things, right? Like right now, I'm obsessed with learning every single different thing. Like I pick something up, and I used to not be like that. I would focus too much on one thing and leave other things on the side. And for example, math, I tried to learn all the math and not worry about other things. So I would go and learn, be more open about learning different things. But in general, I think if you're learning and improving yourself, then that's that process should never end and should just be. I'm happy about that.
When I talk to people from mathematics and physics, and by data, we know that they're one of the smartest people in terms of IQ. I've also found out that intelligence is a curse itself, also, and it's very common for people who are at the cusp of very productive work. They tend to become very depressed, and it's very hard for them to forget the failures that they have in life. And I'm just wondering, what are some of the strategies or the lessons for a younger version of you who's listening at the moment? What would you tell him how to cope with failures and disappointments in life?
Yeah. Oh, great question. I've had a lot of failures. I mean, two careers that failed completely, and I had to switch. Uh, and if you look at it from the past, then they're complete wins because it made me switch. Like I'm glad that I'm not better at some things, because if I was, I'd be stuck in that, doing it and not having fun, right? So I'm glad I was terrible at some things. Um, but yeah, I mean, every failure tells you something about, just teaches you a lesson, right? And this sounds cliche, but it just could not be more true, right? Like you learn more about yourself, and you learn to you almost learn more from failures than from successes, right? So when people have failure, I say, like, this may sound like I'm trying to be cheesy here, but there's something out of there, and sometimes it's hard. And even for myself, sometimes I go, gee, I hope I one day figure out what was good about this particular thing, because it sucks, right? But I think you also have to learn from success, and unlearn a little bit. You see many people, like very famous, or very people who have done a lot in technology. If I'm going to put it as an example, um, who just are tremendously stubborn because that's what worked for them the first time, right? Like he said, okay, I'm going to come up with this crazy idea, and nothing's going to convince me that that's not the way to go. And that's how they succeeded. And says, I'm going to do this every time. Well, you still have to, don't, like, you still have to be careful and check if that particular success was due entirely to what you did, or to what you did plus a little bit of luck, and then be mindful of that and still be as bold as you can, but careful, bold, right? So I try to. I've had successes where I took a risk, or I had to take a risk because I was in no other possibilities, but many times took a random risk, and it paid off, and the next time I'm like more likely to take that risk, and the next time even more likely. But at some point I'm like, okay, I should first check if be mindful of that. So I think you can learn a lot from your failures and your successes.
Do you think it has something to do with age also? So, I mean, we know from personality psychology data that people tend to become less extrovert and open as they age. And I'm just wondering, is it some kind of a biological response to continuously shelling yourself? At some point, you think, well, I have had it better than others. Let's be happy about it.
You do learn a lot. I mean, you appreciate more and more things. I mean, I appreciate many things I've had all my life that now, right, that I didn't see at the time. So I'm much happier now, right? And I think you do become more of an extrovert every time, because I think you just care less about pleasing others and just kind of more comfortable in your own skin. And yeah, also, I mean, facing when people face their greatest fears, it's when they become braver, right? Like if you have a failure, and if you have an idea of like what's the worst thing that can happen, oh, this, and then boom, something this happens and you're still alive, then you're just stronger. Next time you're like, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? Well, I've been there. I think I can, I think I can handle it, right? So you get a little more focused on the present, and less on the future.
When you're extremely tense or engrossed in your work and the pressure is high and you are very irritated, where do you find refuge? Are they long walks, or it's music, or it's sports, or your cartoons? What's that?
Long walks are definitely a
This
great,
seems to be so common among everyone that I talk. Even I do long walks.
yeah.
What is that about long walks?
I don't know. It just clears your mind. I think I'm a little too ADD that I can just not do nothing, right? Like if I'm doing one thing like walking, I can sort of clear my mind. Walking in the trees or something in the forest, or anything I can. It's very useful. So that's my way. I tried, meditation helps.
Oh, really? What kind of
Just
meditation
doing
do you do?
something else. No, I just meditate normally. Like
Okay. Yeah,
chakra
I find it a very
meditation,
helpful
say aligning,
thing.
chakras aligning, things like that. I think is very, very useful. Yeah. Uh,
Are you into Buddhism?
well, I don't know enough about it, but I think it's a wonderful. I think it's a wonderful.
Ah,
Yeah.
that's true. Um, what is your message for someone who's listening to you, who has been your student, who is your fan, who aspires to be you, who has learned from your story from a Colombian city into the best of the best place to work, with so much achievements in life? There's got to be something powerful that you can share with other people now that you're wiser and older and smarter.
Thank you for the kind words. I think finding your passion is the greatest gift. Is the greatest thing that can happen. Of course, it takes a lot of trial and error. It takes a lot of not knowing, and I think we're not comfortable not knowing. But I think it's the best situation, because it's when you learn the most. So I think I used to be wondering what to do in the future, what to do with my career. And I think I used to dread those moments, but they were wonderful because they made me explore. The moments where I knew what was I doing was when I wasn't growing that much. So find your passion, and I think it requires two things: the minor and the major, or sort of the the local and the global. What is the thing that you love to do in your personal time? Like, is it crossword puzzles? Fantastic. Like, what feels like the most fun thing to do with your own time? And then at the same time, the global, which is what world do you want to live in, right? How do you want to make the world a better place? And have those two. And maybe one is here and one is here. Maybe they don't align, but constantly try to, see if they align, and try things. And if you can align those two things, then it's like the most wonderful feeling in the world. So the moment that I said, what do I like more than anything else, even if it's not profitable, or what is the one thing I love? It's teaching. What is the world that I want to live in? It's a world where education is there for everybody, where everybody has the same access, no matter what, to all the best education there is. So we can all contribute the best into society. And when those two things came together, and it's like, oh, actually, that is the same thing. If you can search for that, then that is jackpot, not just for you, but for those around you. So search for that, and don't listen to what society says. Society has a bunch of standards, like making money, or just those are. I mean, it's good to have to make money, but it's not the main function to be optimizing. It should be your passion, your happiness, and how much you can contribute to the world.
I think if I would summarize 12 years of my work and my first book on personality psychology, how I actually got into personality psychology and psychometrics, that would be exactly the words that I would use. That find your passion and align it with your circumstances, and be happy in that, a global one and a local one, and you would never regret living another day. This is why I actually created this personality test, which is Big Five, which is one of the most scientifically valid tests used for hundreds of years now. And I translated that into Urdu to help students in my university who are trying to struggle finding place in your life. Because when you're 19 or you're 20, everything seems plausible, and whatever everyone says, you're more inclined to please your parents, your friends, your colleagues, being successful. And in all these questions, you kind of lose your original self, and this kind of actually helps them. And the results were brilliant, and and I'm so happy that you're actually able to bring this perspective to them at an age where they need it the most. And I think the essence of your work and your videos, and in on a bigger level, your life, is that find what you're gifted with, and use it and enhance it to make a better world. What a fantastic way of putting that. Thank you so much for being with us, Louis. It's such a candid conversation. And one of the reasons I started this podcast was to actually help out my students, bringing them people like you who would inspire them to become great scientists and researchers or thinkers, even a better person. And it's always a pleasure when I get to talk to you or other people who powerfully deliver the message that I'm trying to convey to them. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having. It's an honor to speak with you, and it's been a wonderful time. I think we had a really, really fun chat. So thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.